Welcome back to the Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilt Along. We're on the week of September 22nd. This week we're going to work on Show and Share, Emmy Witch, Boo-Levard Witch, and Hot Witch. I've got everything ready to go. Everything is in its own bag and labeled. I went over the choices and how to prep for this week at the end of last week's video. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to load some light mesh cutaway into my hoop. I have a 9.5 by 14 inch hoop. We're going to do 2 blocks for each hooping. The first hooping, we're going to do the Show and Share and the Boo-Levard Witch. I went over these last week, but just a quick recap if you're using the quilting bundle. These are the files we'll be using today. I already have them loaded on my USB. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. Let's load our files. We're going to start with Show and Share and Boo-Levard Witch. The first thing I'm going to do is load the background quilting for both of these. So I have my Show and Share. I'm going to move that over. And then I'm going to add the Boo-Levard Witch. I've shown how to do this in the past few videos, so if I'm moving too quickly, just refer to earlier videos. I'll link the playlist below. We're going to add our embroidery files. It looks like I've got them lined up right along the bottom, which is good. Let me show you a quick picture of the quilt. Here's the blocks we're working on today. So nothing is pushed all the way to the bottom. Your embroidery is centered on each of the blocks and they're lined up throughout the row. I'm going to save it to my machine just in case. I'm going to hit embroidery. We're going to get started. I'll show you my thread choices as we go. If you're following the thread choices in the instructions, we're starting on page 24 today for Show and Share. So just look through the instructions and see which color they're using. The way I added these will determine the stitch order. I've talked about that before, but just in case. The first thing I added was background quilting, and then the embroidery and the embroidery. So it's going to step through the background quilting first for this block, because that was the first one I dropped in, and then the background quilting for this block. And then when that's done, we'll do the embroidery for this and then the embroidery for this. I have a neutral thread on my machine. We're going to start with the batting placement line for the Show and Share block. My batting is cut at 5.5 by 9.5. It will cover that placement line. Get your batting down and then stitch your tack down line. Trim your batting that's outside the tack down line. Place your background fabric so it covers that placement line. All my fabrics come from my stash. I talked about that before in previous videos. Stitch your fabric tack down line. My tack down line has stitched. I'm going to have another block right here in this hoop. This piece is going to be in the way. I'm going to go ahead and pull this off really quick and trim close to but not on the stitch line. And then we're going to do our background quilting. For my background quilting, I'm going to switch to this white glow-in-the-dark thread. I'll link these below, and they do still glow in the dark. Somebody asked me if they really do glow in the dark. I've had these on my thread wall for 4 years. I finally started using them. They still glow in the dark. My thread has changed. I'm going to stitch my background quilting. That's it for this block right now. We're going to go over to the Boo-Levard Witch. I'm going to go through the same steps. So since you just saw that here, I'll go ahead and stitch it out to music. The batting for this block is trimmed at 5.5 by 9.5. Both of these are quilted. We're going to start on the embroidery. For the Show and Share block, it says to start with a neutral thread color, and you're going to stitch the placement line for the sign, and then the sign is a piece of black fabric, and then you're going to tack it down. And after you tack it down, it's going to stitch the signpost fill and satin outline, which is in black. I'm putting black on right now. I'm using Floriani threads. Here's the color number. I'm going to stitch out the fabric placement line. Grab your sign fabric, make sure you cover your placement line. I'm going to go ahead and add a piece of tape to the top, and then we're going to stitch the tack down line. You want to trim everything that's outside of the tack down line. I've got that trimmed. My machine's ready to go. It's going to stitch the pedestal and the pole and all the stuff around the sign and the satin outline. All of that stitched out, I'm going to take my black thread off. I'm going to put my purple on, and we're going to stitch the Lollipop Light placement line. We're using the glitter vinyl for that. It's in the embellishment kit. If you're not using the embellishment kit, use a piece of fabric. You're going to want to peel the plastic off of this. Sometimes it's really hard to get that started, but you need to take the plastic off, so do that now so you won't forget. Once that little circle that's your placement line has stitched out, you're going to cover that with the glitter vinyl. Make sure it's glitter side up, and then stitch the tack down. I am going to put some tape on this, see how it doesn't lie flat. Once your tack down has stitched, you need to trim outside the tack down line. This is what they call a raw edged applique, so there's not going to be any satin stitching or any decorative stitching outside of it, so trim it up nice and neat, unless you like to trim it messy, however you like. After you have it trimmed, you're going to take it over to your ironing board, and you want to cover it with a pressing cloth and press it with a warm iron. It doesn't specify the time in the instructions. I usually count to about 10. I've trimmed this and pressed it. I'm going to put my glow-in-the-dark white back on. We're going to stitch some detail on the light, and then it's going to stitch out the words and the arrow on the sign. This block is all stitched out. I will tell you, the white glow-in-the-dark thread looks almost like a very, very light gray when it stitches out. It's very interesting, but it does glow in the dark. We are going to move on to the Boo-Levard Witch. The first thing we're going to stitch is a placement line for the skirt. I have a soft black fabric for the skirt, so I went ahead and put on my black thread. Go ahead and cover your placement line with your skirt fabric. I'm using a small piece of tape to hold it in place, then stitch the tack down and trim. The next steps are the corset placement and the hat placement. Both of those are in purple. I have a purple fabric for the corset, and then we've got purple glitter for the hat, so I put my purple thread on my machine. For the corset, I picked this purple fabric. I had a charm square, so I added fusible to the back. This is obviously much bigger than what I need, so I'm going to slide it. I'm going to try and center it back. It's going to have some stitching over it anyway. We're going to go ahead and tack that down, and then I'll trim outside the tack down line. I did pretty good. I got a bat right in the center there. The next thing we're going to stitch is the hat placement line. If you're using the embellishment kit, the hat uses the purple glitter vinyl, so make sure you peel off that plastic like before. Take your glitter vinyl, make sure you cover that placement line. And I am going to tape this again to help it lie flat and make sure it doesn't slide. Once you stitch the tack down for this, trim it, and then take it over to your iron just like before. Cover it with the pressing cloth, count to 10, and then we'll go to the next step. Once you have that trimmed and you've done the pressing with your iron and the pressing cloth, we're going to stitch out the hat band. I'm going to use black for that. Next up are the boots. I'm going to continue with the black thread. Let's take a close-up look at these boots. Do you see the problem with that? See all the white that's poking through? I've got a new needle, good fusible, good thread. I noticed something interesting on my screen. Right there. There's a little space of white right there. There's some unevenness in the stitching even on the screen of the computer. This isn't bad, but I'd like it to look a little cleaner. So what I'm going to do is back up the machine and just do this step over and see if it improves the look of the boots. Let's have a look. That's after the second stitch out. It's a little better. There's still some gaps. I like that better than it looked before. I wish it would stitch out a little bit nicer. I do have nice starched pressed fabric. We've got Pellon SF101. I've got the Kimberbell stabilizer. I put a new needle on, good thread, and my machine is not at full speed. I'm going to change to this super bright green thread. We're going to stitch out her hair and the ruffle trim on the bottom of the dress. We're going to switch to black thread and stitch out the satin on the skirt. The next step is the detail on the corset, and that is in black. So much for my centered bat. He got mowed over with that stitching. You can't even tell there's a bat on the center of that. We're going to go ahead and switch to purple, and then we're going to stitch the satin stitching around the corset top. We're done with these two blocks. Let's move on to our next two. We're going to do the haunt and the ME Witch, which I'm thinking stands for machine embroidery. In order to make these both fit in one hooping, I have to flip them sideways. So I'll show you how to do that. Here's my background quilting for the Haunt Witch. Go ahead and set that. Now you can see, even if I move this all the way to the top or all the way to the side, there's not going to be enough room for my biggest hoop. So we're going to hit Edit, Rotate, and I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. Now I can slide it to the top, and now I have enough room to add the next one. Let's add our next file for background quilting. That way we can do both the background quilting sections first. Here's the quilting for the ME Witch. Go ahead and hit set. See how it doesn't fit? Edit, rotate, 90 degrees. Now when I add my embroidery blocks on top of these, I also have to rotate that. So these are set. Let's add the embroidery blocks. Here's the Haunt Witch. We're going to rotate. Same direction. Make sure if you rotate them 90 degrees this way or 90 degrees that way, you do the same thing so you don't end up with your quilting one direction and your blocks another direction. This is in the center of the screen. It looks pretty good. I'm going to use these arrows to move the block. That looks good. It looks like I've got the same amount of space up here, down here. I think I need to come this way just a little bit. You almost have to turn your head sideways to make sure. That looks pretty centered. That looks good. Let's add our next block. Those look centered. I'm going to save this to my machine. And we're ready to get started. We're going to do the background quilting for the top block first, which is the Haunt Witch, and then the background quilting for the bottom block, which is the ME Witch. Both of these blocks have a finished size of 6.5 by 8.5, so your batting needs to be 7.5 by 9.5. I'll be using this fabric in the background for both. This fabric is still available. That'll be linked below. I found it at Frat Quarter Shop. You can get it there. You can look and see if you can find it somewhere else. And when I get to my background quilting, I'm going to use the white glow-in-the-dark thread. I have my neutral thread on my machine. This is just like what we just did. You're going to do your batting placement, batting tack down, trim your batting, fabric placement, fabric tack down, and do your background quilting. I'll go ahead and run all of that to music because we've done that a few times now for this quilt, and then we'll step through the embroidery and applique portion of the blocks together. We're going to start on the Haunt Witch. The first thing we're going to stitch out is a skirt placement line, and then we're going to tack that down and trim that fabric, and then the hat placement line, and we're going to work with the glitter. This is my skirt fabric, and this is the hat fabric. We will have an outline for this later, but right now we're going to work with these two pieces. We're going to place them, tack them down, and trim them. I'm going to go ahead and put the black thread on my machine. I'm going to stitch the placement line for the skirt fabric. Grab your skirt fabric. You want to make sure to cover that placement line. My piece is a little bit larger. I grabbed a piece from a charm pack to do this. Go ahead and add a piece of tape just in case, and we're going to stitch the tack down, and then after the tack down, trim everything outside the tack down line. I've got that trimmed. Next we're going to stitch the placement line for the glitter vinyl. While that's stitching out, make sure to peel that plastic off from the top of your glitter vinyl. Got the plastic off. You want to make sure to cover those lines, and I'm going to tape it. Then we'll stitch the tack down, and once this is tacked down you want to trim it, and this again is raw edge applique, so there's no decorative stitching outside of the glitter vinyl, so take a little extra time and trim it so it looks real nice. Once you have that trimmed, remember to do the heat set on your iron. Cover it with the pressing cloth. Press it for about 10 seconds. We're going to stitch out the hat band. I'm going to use this color, the color I'm using for both grays so far. There's a light gray and a dark gray in the instructions, so refer to the instructions if you're following their color chart. After you stitch the band, we're going to stitch the flower on the hat. I'm going to be using this for the orange. Refer to the color chart. I think they have a light orange and a dark orange. Next is the center fill on the flower. That's done in black. Next we're going to stitch what they're calling the leg fill. It's going to stitch 2 little rectangles of black, and then after that we'll overstitch the stripes with the orange, and then we'll go back to black and stitch the feet. I'll go ahead and run those together. Got the same problem with these shoes as I did with the other shoes, where there's gaps in it, and I can actually see the gaps on my machine as well. So there's something in this design that's leaving open spaces. I am going to go ahead and stitch out these twice because that will fill in some of the spaces, and then we'll move on to the skirt detail. I'm done with the boots for the second time. There's still some white peeking through. It's going to be the way it's going to be. I've switched to my orange. Refer to your instructions to figure out if it's the dark or light orange if you're following their coloring. And we're going to stitch the outline around the skirt. The next thing it's going to stitch out is a little detail right here. And in the original quilt, this skirt is a light background with the polka dots, and mine is a black background with the polka dots. So if I switch it to black, as it's got it listed in the instructions, it's not going to show. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as orange. This block is all stitched out. My machine already moved up to the next one. I was playing bobbin chicken there at the end. I have about 5 inches of bobbin thread, so I just made it. We're going to start the ME Witch block. Switch to black. The first thing it's going to stitch is the little spider web and the little spider. Next up is the hat placement line. Make sure to peel off your plastic from your glitter vinyl. Go ahead and cover up that line with your glitter vinyl. Going to go ahead and tape this in place. We'll stitch the tack down, and then you'll want to trim it and then heat set it with the pressing cloth. Go ahead and do all of those steps. I've trimmed the vinyl and set it with the iron. Go ahead and switch to purple. We're going to stitch the hat band. Next is the buckle on the hat band. I think they're using light orange. That's what it looks like on the coloring on my machine. Double check your instructions if you're following their coloring. I've been using one orange throughout so far. Next up is the leg fill, which is in purple. Next up are the stripes. It looks like they're using dark gray for this. Check your instructions. I really like the way the orange buckle looks on the hat with the purple band, so I'm going to stitch my stripes in orange. I did look at the final picture of the quilt where we're going to add the little mini quilts, and that one has an orange border around it, so there will be a lot of orange on this, but I think I'm going to like this better with orange stripes. So pick your color and then stitch the leg stripe detail. We've got 2 more things to stitch out. You've got your boots, which are black, and then the little flower, which is orange. I'm going to go ahead and run those 2 together. So stitch your boots first, and then change to the orange and stitch the little flower. I've got all my blocks out of the hoop. I went ahead and did a quick trim to get them all separated. We're going to start with the Haunt Witch and the ME Witch because these are pretty straightforward. These both trimmed to 6.5 by 8.5. If you have the orange pop rulers, there is a 6.5 by 8.5 ruler. I've shown before how to use these, so I'll move through this really quick. You can see previous videos and I go step by step on using these rulers. So the 6.5 by 8.5 is the medium size in the rectangle set. You've got one more big one on the outside to help with your hand placement and stability. And as I'm lining this up to trim, I can see there's going to be some jump threads. There's even one between the shoe that I'm going to need to go back and trim. I'll do that off camera. I'll go ahead and trim these two blocks. I'll set it to music. Talk about trimming the show and share block. This block is going to trim 4.5 by 8.5. And if you look in the instructions, it does the little trick, and we did it last time, where you do one part with one orange pop ruler and another part with another orange pop ruler. This time I'm going to use a regular quilting ruler, and we'll see how that turns out. So I know the top part is 4.5 and then 8.5 long. When you look at your block, there's an outside fabric tack down line right here. This is the line that I'm looking at. It's a little hard to see because it's white on white. Between these two, it should be 4.5. This is a 4.5 inch square ruler. Let's just place that down and have a look. Yes, that's 4.5. So we can trim straight on these, and then from the outside line here and the outside line here, that should be 8.5. Let's take this ruler, have a look. I'm right on it here. I'm a little bit past if I trim at 8.5, so I need to line up a little bit over. So what I would say is, if you're using regular quilting rulers, measure it first. It may even be easier to see your stitching lines on the back. Whatever works for you, measure it. You can mark it if you want and trim it, and honestly, even if you're off a little bit, it's not going to matter. It's going to go in the quilt just fine. What I'm going to do is start here. Now I measured line to line 4.5. I'm measuring again with this ruler. It is that these two lines are exact. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to line up my regular ruler right along that outside line. We'll go ahead and trim that. There's my 4.5. I do have another ruler that's 8.5 inches wide. Let's measure this part again with this ruler. Here's the outside stitch line right there, and yeah, these aren't exact. So what I would say is, to get that exact 8.5, you can use your orange pop ruler, or if you're using a regular quilting ruler, I would go a little bit outside each of those lines. So there's that line. I'm just going to go a little bit outside. Here's the 8.5 inch wide ruler. Looks good. This block is done. Let's go to the next one. The Boo-Levard Witch is also 4.5, 8.5. Using the 4.5 inch square, it's exact. Those outside stitch lines are 4.5. And let's see if this one's the same, if it's a little bit off. I'm gonna line up right there. This one's closer. I think that just has to do with the background quilting and how dense it is, and if it pulls in the fabric. I'll start on the top and the bottom this time. And then let's cut the sides. We've got all these cut. Before we have a final look at these, let's look at what we need to get ready for next week. Next week we're going to work on the sewing machine, thimble flowers, pumpkin pin cushions, there's 3 of these, and the solid dress form. It was helpful to have this in front of me as well as this when I figured out the quilting. I'm going to go through the quilting with you so you don't have to flip it back and forth and figure it out. Section 2, number 13, this is your quilting that you need for the sewing machine block. Section 5, number 32 is the thimbles and flowers. Section 6 right here at the top, number 37, that's the solid dress form. For the pumpkin pin cushions, we're making 3. We've got one here, and one here. These 2 use the same background. So they are detailed pumpkin pin cushion, section 1, that's this one right up here. I wrote upper left so I wouldn't forget. It uses this KDQ 061 Halloween 4 4x4, and you'll notice the one that is in the bottom near the center also uses KDQ 061 Halloween 4 4x4. The one that's over here on the side, they decided to use different background quilting. You can see it's number 35, pumpkin pincushion, and it's a different file. It's the KDQ 032 Wavy 3 4x4 vertical. Let's look at our fabric choices, and we have one extra thing we're going to need for next week. Extra thing is Flexi Foam. If you don't have any of this handy but you have soft and stable, that'll work fine. If you have neither one, you can double up your batting. This just gives your blocks a little bit of puff behind it. Pumpkin pin cushions, you need a piece 4 by 3.5 for each pumpkin. Remember, we're making 3 of those, so you'll need to cut 3, that size. The solid dress form, we need a piece 2.5 by 4. This is all in the instructions. This will be in addition to the batting used for the background quilting. This is something that we're going to work with the applique next week. I've pulled my fabrics. I don't have them cut yet. I'm going to do that off camera, but I'll show you what I'll be using. For the sewing machine block, for the background, I picked this one with the pennants. On the original quilt, they have an orange and white stripe in the background. And for my sewing machine, I picked black. The final cut size on this block is 8.5 by 6.5, so you want to cut your batting 9.5 by 7.5. For my thimble flowers, I picked this fun print for the background. They used that in the border. I don't have enough for the border, but I already have an idea for the border, so keep sewing along and you'll see what I have in store for that. For my thimbles, I pulled a gray. For this block, the final trim size is 6.5 by 4.5, so you want to cut your batting at 7.5 by 5.5. A couple of quick corrections that I noticed as I was pulling my fabrics and adding my fusible to the back. The thimble flowers and the sewing machine both use embroidery leather that comes in the embellishment kit. The embroidery leather is a PVC product. It's not really leather, so it's not an animal product. The thimble flowers uses the silver embroidery leather, and then the sewing machine uses the black embroidery leather. So if you have the embellishment kit, make sure you pull those for those 2 blocks. We've got to make 3 pumpkin pin cushions. The fabric I picked for the pumpkins I got from this charm pack, Haunted Hues by Wilmington. I've had it for a while. I don't know if you can still get it, but if you like the fabrics, I just wanted to show that to you. For the background, I'm using the dot, which is linked below. You need 2 fabrics for each pumpkin. So here's one pumpkin. Here's another. Here's another. The cut size for these pumpkin blocks is 4.5 inch square. So cut yourself 3 pieces of batting, 5.5 inches square, and that's in addition to that Flexi Foam. These are my fabrics for the dress form. I picked the cobwebs with the spiders for the background and the stripes for the dress. This came from the Kimberbell Charm Pack of Halloween prints. There's also going to be a belt and a little fluffy skirt. That comes from the embellishment kit. This block finishes 4.5 by 6.5, so cut your batting 5.5 by 7.5. As I cut all of these in prep for next week, I'm going to add fusible backing to all my fabrics. I've been doing that throughout. I'm using Pellon SF101. You can find all the cut sizes for your fabric and the fabric requirements, the cutting guide right here, and they're also listed throughout the instructions before each block. We've talked about cutting the fabric before, and we've done that before on camera, so I'll let you look that up and go ahead and do your own fabric cutting. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments box below. Let's get a look at our blocks. All of our witch blocks are going to have embellishments, which we'll do later on. There's little buttons for the hand, and there's little printed quilts. I believe if you don't have the embellishment kit, there's a way to download the printed picture and print it off. Thank you for joining me for the week of September 22nd, Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilt-A-Long. Come back next week. September 29th, we'll be working on the sewing machine, thimble flowers, 3 pumpkin pin cushions, and the solid dress form. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Leave any comments, feedback, questions below the video. I'd really appreciate it. We'll have this done just in time for Halloween. See you next time.